Hi, I'm Kenna Johnson from the Channel Company. Infrastructure monitoring is critical for MSPs as they scale and diversify. According to Future Business Insights, the managed services market is projected to reach $880 billion by 2032, making smart, scalable tools more essential than ever. Entuity Software from Park Place Technologies helps IT ops cut noise, automate tasks, and stay ahead. Joining me today to talk about how Entuity is helping MSPs tackle these challenges and drive operational efficiency is John Diamond from Entuity Software. Welcome, John.
Great to meet you, Kenna.
What are the key factors MSPs should consider to ensure their monitoring tools can scale effectively as their client base and infrastructure grows?
I think the number one thing to bear in mind is that you are planning for expansion, and any form of monitoring system will hit a limit at some point when running on a single server. So the architecture of whatever system you intend going with needs to have a multi-server architecture that can break that barrier imposed by a single server. And to break it as cleanly and painlessly as possible is really a good idea. I'd also recommend that you avoid the more traditional architectures where you have one large central database and various remote polars, you might call them, gathering data into that central database. Because at the end of the day, that central database is going to become your limiting factor, your bottleneck, your single point of failure. And you really want to try and keep away from that. As your system expands, as your customer base expands, you really want a system that expands its capabilities at the same time and not leaving you with one insurmountable bottleneck in the middle. Also, something that is worth noting is that you may well have some of your customers where it makes sense to put gathering appliances or servers on-prem at that customer. In other cases, it really doesn't make sense, particularly if they're very small customers. In that case, you really want to have the advantage of a centralized data gathering server or system that you can get the economy of scale from handling multiple customers on the same system. So you're probably going to end up with both, and an architecture that can handle both is really going to avoid you being cornered in a system that can't be expanded the way you want.
How can multi-tenancy and monitoring solutions enhance the management of multiple clients, and what are the best practices for implementing it?
What you could do with focusing on is the use of the shared monitoring resources. That's where you're going to get the economy of scale, so that you've got the same system potentially handling multiple clients, again, particularly if they're small. So that has with it its own problems, particularly when it comes to monitoring companies that are using the same IP address space, for example. If your system can't handle that, you're going to be forced into using multiple servers or appliances where you may not otherwise intend to. So building that into your wish list is important to avoid you being trapped. The administrative overheads of the system should not be overlooked. You want a system that is not going to drown you in human effort in keeping the thing running and care and fed. And one of the areas where we feel that attention should be paid um, is keeping data and in databases in a federated manner. So don't put it all in one place. Have that distributed within your system so that it can expand as your requirements expand. As more customers are added, then the database gets more instances so that it's not all bottlenecked in the center.
For MSPs, time is money. How does Intuiti's event management system help MSPs reduce alert fatigue and improve response time?
Well, alert fatigue is often also known as event noise. It's the bane of the industry. And I think the number one thing to know is that there is no one solution. You need a kit bag of multiple ways of attacking this animal. It's something that you have to get hold of, you have to deal with. And one of the approaches that Entuity has taken is incorporating a form of root cause analysis. That means that when you've got outages that are impacting a whole chunk of your monitored real estate, the parts of the network that you can't get to because of another outage, you don't go worrying about. You don't alert on that because that isn't the problem. Focusing your attention on what the problem is helps enormously. That really does need to be automated to keep the thing manageable. Other forms of correlation become relevant. To have a very configurable event management system that you can build in whatever rules are necessary, because every customer situation is just that little bit different. That's important. Threshold management is something you need to pay attention to. Thresholds govern when alerts are generated, and not every case is going to require the same threshold settlement. So making that practical to administer at scale is going to help you. And other forms of rule-based event elimination, dealing with situations you may even not have thought of already that may become uniquely required in a particular customer scenario you need to deal with. Here's a good one, and that is flap detection and elimination. Various things in an IT system can go into a flappy state. A classic one is on network devices where you've got circuits flapping from operational to down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Knowing every time it changes state, if it's happening frequently, isn't going to help you. Finding a way of automatically detecting that scenario and then blocking those state transitions from generating further alerts until that problem resolves itself is going to help enormously there. You can cut an incredible number of alerts down if you've got a flapping situation. And finally, something which we have found helps to a very high degree is where you have circuits with trivial amounts of traffic on them. Don't alert on high percentages of port faults or discards. Because if that port is so trivially quiet that really you could care less what's going on, then don't generate alerts on it and make that automatic. And so that's something that we've added because it really does help keeping noise to a bed.
Why is it critical for MSPs to integrate their monitoring tools with ITSM, ticketing, and messaging platforms? And how does Entuity streamline this process?
I think the number one thing here is that your management system, let's take Entuity as a good example, has a large amount of information, useful information. When problems are detected that you want a ticket generated for, the number one thing you don't want to be doing is hand transposing information that's in the system into a ticketing system. That information should be able to be conveyed and placed in the ticket along with all of the other pieces of information required as efficiently as possible. And that's where integration, and really convenient if it's out of the box integration, can come to help you. If you've got external systems, let's take a good popular example of ServiceNow. Integrating into ServiceNow in an out-of-the-box manner where you convey as much useful information as possible into that ticket is going to help you enormously. One thing that, again, that can be overlooked is that you won't necessarily know all of your requirements up front. New requirements can emerge over time, and the ability to customize what you've got, and particularly those integrations, that can be something that you got to look out for. If you're not able to have that level of flexibility, it could get in your way down the line.
John, what are the essential components of a robust infrastructure monitoring solution, and how can MSPs ensure comprehensive coverage across diverse environments?
Well, I think the number one thing to appreciate here is that a management system really needs to offer a combination of pull and push data gathering. The pull type gathering is what I would describe polling as. Traditional approaches such as polling SMMP agents on devices, polling using protocols like WinRM in the Windows environment, REST APIs or proprietary APIs in other environments. That is a big part of what you need to do. But at the same time, you need to be able to accept alerts that are being pushed from equipment into the management system. And that can involve protocols such as SMMP traps, syslog messages, and in the modern world, webhooks are becoming increasingly more relevant there. Other aspects is that you got to look at the various different subcomponents of a management system. And it's not only the data gathering, including the polling and the trap handling, but the event management. We've mentioned that already, but that's a critical aspect. That's got to be really flexible. And people expect on the user interface front, a dashboarding style user interface. And you've also got to have good administrative UIs that are efficient for your staff to use to keep the system configured the way that the end users would expect. The configuration for gathering information from the devices should include the ability to push configuration changes out to those devices and also pull back their configurations as and when they change. And also note that when those configurations come back, it really helps if they can be validated and look for any problems that would be indicative of an issue that should be proactively dealt with. The system, it could do with having built-in reporting. Reporting is often seen as a deliverable from an MSP, maybe a monthly summary, maybe some availability reporting. That's just scratching the surface of reporting. Reporting often could do with being able to be customized, often on a per customer basis. And so that's something you really need to be looking for. Don't think in terms of it being a third-party add-on. It really needs to be integral to the system to work efficiently. And finally, don't forget all of the nuances and aspects of role-based access control. RBAC is a critical aspect of what an MSP requires. You have to be able to keep the data separate, really separate between customers. And on occasions, that means that some customers may insist upon their data being kept in physically different databases from everybody else's. It all depends. If you've got a lot of very small customers, maybe that isn't so important. But certainly when the customers are high profile or large, then that can often be a requirement.
How can automation within platforms like Entuity reduce manual workloads and increase operational efficiency?
I think you have to understand and appreciate that when you're dealing with large IT systems and networks, particularly where they're multiplied by the fact that you're dealing with multiple customers, the complexity of that environment is just going to completely outstrip the capability of humans to administer. It's got to be heavily automated to be able to be practically manageable. Something which is fundamental to IT systems and particularly networks is the fact that they change. What you see day one is rarely exactly what's there day two or day three, etc. So the system needs to be able to cope with that. If that requires human babysitting of the management system, you're doomed to failure. It's got to be as automated as possible. The system has to know when changes have happened and deal with them without having a human involved in every little decision and change that's made there. The automation really goes way beyond that. You're going to need to be able to group the assets together that you're monitoring, and they, at the barest minimum, be grouped per customer. Many of your customers are going to want them subgrouped within their environments, maybe geographically, maybe by business function, maybe by technology type. But one way or another, there's going to need to be a grouping mechanism, and that needs to be as automatically maintained as possible. Otherwise, it's going to become a nightmare to keep up to date. For that's important. We've already talked about alerts and automating the alerting. And finally, one point that is worth just bearing in mind is that the automatic archiving of equipment configurations centrally is going to help enormously when you have a major outage, equipment failure, where you desperately need access to the most recent configuration. And that is going to be an important part of the deliverable that your customers these days are going to expect.
How can real-time monitoring and alerting systems empower MSPs to be more proactive? And what customization options are important for tailoring alerts?
What it really means is that you want to be addressing issues before they become customer impacting. That's the bottom line. In looking at that, areas where you can really think about being proactive are in disk volume utilization, where the utilization of disk volumes is going up and up, as it normally does. Being able to nip that in the bud before you run out of room on a volume, which havoc happens when you run out of room on disk volumes, particularly if they've got databases on them. You want to avoid at all costs. That you've got a chance of being able to spot early trends and hitting thresholds is a great way to be proactive. In the same way, bandwidth utilization on network circuits is something you can keep track of. You can predict into the future using various algorithms and looking at when you've crossed thresholds or you're likely to cross thresholds in the near future is something that gives you the chance, if you're on top of your game, of dealing with that ahead of time. Another type of resource are spare switch ports on your access switches. You're probably not using all of your ports, so there's going to be some of them spare. It's a good thing to have some of them spare because you never know what's around the corner as far as requirements go. One or two new staff on a floor in a building. Do you need a new switch? Maybe not. Maybe you just plug into spare ports on the existing switch. The last thing you want to be doing is just unplugging existing connections from an access layer switch because they don't happen to be being used at the moment. If that was going to a user who happened to be out for a dental appointment that afternoon, they're not going to be happy in the morning when they find they've been disconnected from the network. So there's good ways to deal with that. And another, let me just give you one final idea of a resource in your IT environment, and that's going to be IP address space. It's not physical. You can't pick up and hurl an IP address against a wall, but it is a resource that is finite. And when you run out of IP addresses within a defined range, then problems occur. So making sure that you are looking at that, keeping an eye on it, and reacting when the amount of spare IP addresses hits a certain value ahead of time. Again, you are being proactive about avoiding problems before they become customer impacting.
In what ways can automation within monitoring tools reduce manual workload and enhance operational efficiency for MSPs?
Anything that an operator can do that could be handled by an algorithm is an area of that you um, can think of as something that could be offloaded from that operator. You want to try and minimize the load on the operators. They're always going to have more work to do than they've got hours in the day. That's the name of the game. That's the business. And anything you can do to give them a fighting chance of actually achieving what they ought to be in order to be proactive, as we've just been talking about, stay on top of problems as they occur, is going to be worthwhile. That includes automating the grouping of assets. We talked about that already, adjusting those thresholds, to try and improve the usefulness of the alerts that come from them. How about upgrading device firmware, providing them tools to automatically upgrade the firmware rather than having, again, to babysit each device that you're upgrading individually. One final thing, pay attention to patching requirements. If you can automate aspects of patching, again, you're going to be taking load off the operators that need not be bogging them down.
Now, what challenges do MSPs face in monitoring hybrid environments, and how can they address these challenges effectively with the right tools?
In a hybrid environment, some of your workloads are going to be on-prem in your data centers or the customer's data centers. Some of them are going to be out in the cloud. That's what we mean by hybrid. Those workloads quite often will migrate periodically from one to the other. Now, that might be down to available resources in the data center. If you've got resources not being used in the data center, then why are you paying a cloud hosting vendor to host them for you? You might want to bring certain applications back in-house. You may have a growth in the requirement for the particular application that outstrips your data center's ability to cope with it. Rather than upgrading aspects of the data center, you may want to push it out into the cloud. It may be a temporary, maybe a seasonal situation around Christmas time. If you're a retailer, you're probably going to be using additional resources that go beyond your own internal capabilities. That dynamism of what is being managed where, you need to be able to handle that. If your management system can't automatically contend with those dynamic changes, you're going to be at a disadvantage. There's more to manage in an on-prem data center than in the cloud, except the fact that in an on-prem data center, you're going to be responsible for the network of the customer's network. That is all hidden from him by a cloud vendor. And then you've got other things like power supply. The power bus is coming into the data center, the cooling, environmental, and even access to the data center. That is aspects that really you don't need to be so concerned about or at all in a cloud environment. So there's different things you need to be worried about, and that's what you need to keep your eye on everything as opposed to just focusing on one or two aspects of it.
How can MSPs assess the level of support and the reputation of vendors when selecting a monitoring solution, and why is this important?
I think what I would recommend there is that although the opinion of analysts and reviewers are important and they have value, it's not the only source of information that you should be seeking out. You've got to look further. And we would recommend that if at all possible, you're going to want to seek the opinion of existing users of a system that you're thinking about investing in. It's not always easy to go find relevant sources of that user input. One area that I would say is well worth investigating is an organization called G2. They are based on end user opinions of the software that they are reviewing. And so it's not being written by reviewers, it's all written by end users. So I think G2 is about as down to earth as you can get for real end user feedback.
Now, John, you shared a lot of great information with us. Where can we learn more?
But if you just go to entuity.com, there is a wealth of information there, including a way of contacting our sales team. If you want to chat further, just to work out whether or not there's a relevance in what we have to offer to what you're thinking of doing, then just reach out that way. Great way to get in touch. And finally, as I mentioned a moment ago, don't forget G2. Take a look at what G2 says about various companies you might be considering, including Entuity, and get a feel for what the real end users are saying about us.
John, you clearly have a passion for this. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Great talking to you, Kenna.
If you'd like to learn more about Entuity, visit the website on your screen. For the channel company, I'm Kenna Johnson.